So basically we have redone all the driving physics in the game, and I will show you that in a second when I spawn my new vehicle here. So the entire vehicle driving code has been redone, and the old one had a lot of different routes going out to the different kinds of vehicles. So you had one set of code for wheeled vehicles, then you had another set of code for motorcycles, a third kind of code for all the tanks, and then a separate one for the tracked vehicles. We have now cleaned up all that stuff and made a brand new set of vehicle code that handles all the vehicles in one single bundle, which makes it a bit easier to work with. And we have, since we cleaned it up and did it from scratch, made some changes, hopefully for the better, which you should feel when you play the new game, that the vehicles are quite different handling than they were before. There's some sliding when you're doing sharp turns. Overall, they feel more responsive, at least I think.
Part of the job you work with, as I understood it, is simply looking at a base thing like speed. Yes. Compared to motor power of the individual vehicles?
Yes, so we have now based all the acceleration of each vehicle on their motor power divided by their weight. So we have the weight ratio of the engine. And I'm trying not to crash while I also try to look at the camera. So accelerations of each vehicle are based on their motor power versus their weight. This isn't 100% accurate because you also have something like torque and what kinds of gears they are, but it is a very good approximation and it does give a very good feel to each vehicle. So generally all the vehicles are a lot more faster at accelerating than they were before. They turn sharper and you can actually do power slides if you hit a corner at a high speed. And the brakes have also been increased, so braking power, let me just get up to speed. So that's quite optimistic brake power we have on the vehicles, but we did that for a number of reasons. That one, it feels better when you're playing the game, and two, it makes it easier to avoid hitting your teammates. So more control over the vehicles.
There's two basic types of brakes in there.
Yes.
Letting go and going.
If you just release the forward arrow, the vehicle will come slowly to a halt, like it's coasting. You're letting go of the accelerator. On all wheeled vehicles, this is a fairly slow deceleration, but on all the tracked vehicles, it is actually a fairly powerful brake. And that's because on the track vehicles, we also included emergency brakes. Like when you really step on the brake, the vehicle will come to a halt almost immediately. And I'll get back to that later when I show the tanks. Yeah. One other feature we put in while we did the new vehicle stuff is that you now have the ability to enable mouse steering for all the wheeled vehicles. And you do that by going into the menu, into input, and then you can select car control mode, mouse. So with that selected, the vehicle will always try to point in the direction you are pointing with the camera. Some might prefer it. It's a bit more casual to play like this, and it does give you the benefit that you can do small turns easier.
That's cool. So that's totally up to the individual player,
yes.
Which way you want
to play. So if you prefer to play like this, this is now an option for you. While you're in mouse control, you can also start driving sideways. So if I now click on the sideways button, the vehicle will try to go to the left compared to the direction I'm facing. So it might take some time to get used to, but I think it's worth a try to see if this is something for you. And if it's not, you can always go back and select classic keyboard controls.
Cool, great. A lot of the work you've been doing has been on tracked vehicles.
Yes.
Because we like those.
So let me just park this Jeep out here. And I'll spawn one of my favorite vehicles. Hang on, I just need to do some commands here.
Do all the stuff that you, the players, can't do first, and then we'll get a hold of the tank we wanna drive around in.
Yes. Let's go for the T-70.
Yeah.
Which is one of the coolest looking vehicles we have, at least in my humble opinion. So for all the tanks, I've now also paid attention to what sort of steering system they have, and I've made it into 3 main categories. There's clutch steering, just clutch brake steering, then we have controlled differential steering, and lastly there's a double differential. I'm starting with the clutch braking steering, which is the most basic one and is the one used on pretty much all the Soviet vehicles and most of the German vehicles. On a clutch brake system, you have the main power shaft that just goes out to the drive axis, and on each drive axis before the drive sprocket there's a clutch and a brake. And the driver has 2 steering levers, and when he starts pulling one of the levers, it first declutches the drive sprocket from the main axis, which means you remove all power from that axis, which will cause the tank to slightly turn. And if you pulls the lever even further back, it puts on an active brake on that side of the vehicle, which means you stop that track completely and you start turning around on that track. This is a very simple and a very efficient way to maneuver a tank, but it does have that drawback. As soon as you start pulling the lever, you are pretty much disconnecting the drive power from half of the vehicle.
Yeah.
And when you pull it even further back, you are actually braking the vehicles.
So you're essentially
slowing it down. So you're losing a lot of speed when you are turning on these clutch brake. I've been bit generous in the amount of braking it actually does, so it's not as bad as it should be, but it is slightly noticeable that you're slowing down when you're turning.
But the advantages that you can do, as we just saw, you can do pretty small turns.
Yes, on these clutch brake vehicles, if I try to turn on the spot, you will see that the right track doesn't move at all and the left track moves. So you're pirouetting around the right track, and likewise you can do it around the left track. It also means that if you're building up a lot of speed, you can use all this momentum to do a fairly quick turn, like this. So this is turning a lot faster than you could in the old system, because you're using that momentum to gain a speed boost, to get a turning boost.
Cool. So this one is in all Soviets and most of the Germans.
Yes.
And the Americans are using...
The Americans are using a bit more complicated system. Actually, it's not that much more complicated, but hang on, let me just spawn your average American tank. Good old Sherman. So on the American tanks, they are using what's called controlled differential. And on a controlled differential, you have the main power shaft that goes out to a differential, which this differential has 2 great big idlers, 2 big wheels, which has a connection of planetary gears that goes to each side of the axis. And as long as you're not pulling any of your steering levers, these 2 idlers will just continue to roll along with the differential, and you have equal amount of rotation going out to each of the tracks. But if you start pulling on one of your steering levers, you are actively braking one of the idlers, which is slowing it down, and that changes the gear ratio between the 2 axes. So now you are removing power from one of the axes and adding it to the other one.
Okay, yeah.
So you're not losing any speed, at least not a whole lot of speed, when you start turning on a controlled differential, because you are just transferring the rotation from one track over to the other. So that has the advantage that you're not losing a lot of speed, as I said, but it has the disadvantage that you can't turn on the spot, because it always has to move forward.
It doesn't need to have a momentum to move, yeah.
So if I try to turn on the spot by just pressing the left key, you will see it'll start driving forward to make this turn. This is also one of the times where I've been a bit generous for the players, and this turn radius is a lot sharper than it actually should be, but it's a balance between realism and fun action game.
Again, so we're not doing a World War II simulator, we're doing a World War II
So this is just a little
game.
nod to the way these tanks are supposed to be controlled without making it a huge hindrance. And you can, of course, if you need to turn on the spot, just start reversing while turning and doing like a 3-point turn.
But the advantage is that when you are actually going forward, it won't slow you down when you turn.
It's very efficient in terms of speed. And if you build up your momentum and you start turning, you'll also do a very quick turn.
See if we can get some speed on it.
This is probably not the best vehicle in terms of acceleration, but I just like the look of that cast hull.
Big hunk of metal trying to get up to speed, of course, takes a bit of time.
So yeah, the advantage on these American tanks is that you are not losing a lot of speed when you're turning, so you can do a lot of corrections without huge loss. And we have the last, which is the more advanced one. This is the double differential, and on these you have 2 power shafts going out from the engine. One of them goes directly to the drive the tracks directly out to the axis, while the other shaft is a steering shaft, which is split out to a differential on either side for each wheel, which means that when you start rotating the driving shaft, it adds rotation to one track while removing it from the other. And that means that when you start turning, you're not losing any velocity at all because your power shaft is still going out to both of the tracks. And this also means that you can put your main shaft in neutral and just use the steering shaft and have one track go forward and the other track go backwards.
So you can basically turn on the spot?
Yes. And this is more equal to how the tanks used to play before.
Yeah.
And like I said, one of the other advantages to this is that you're not losing speed at all when you're turning. But the disadvantage is that you are more or less turning at a constant rate, no matter how fast you're going. So if you are at speed, you have a large turning radius. But if you're then going to a low speed, you can turn on the spot. This is a bit of a simplification over how it is in real life. In real life, the system was a bit more complicated. You had multiple gears. You could change between depending on how big a curve you want to do when you're doing your turn. We've made it a bit more simple, and we are using the same system on the Tiger and the Panther and the Tiger 2, where they did have slight differences in the mechanics. And they also did have some manual brakes you could apply to the tracks if you needed to make a faster turn.
But again, we're not in the business of educating tank mechanics. We just want to get you out there and shooting at the enemy.
We like to make a small nod toward the actual tank mechanics, but this is still an action game, and we are more focused on it being fun above all.
Exactly. That being handling and steering and a lot of mechanics.
Yes.
What you might have noticed, either if you're on prototype server, if you've been there, or you might notice in this is that it does actually matter where you drive.
Yes.
So what we now have terrain.
Yes. Now the terrain matters. We have 11 different kind of terrain types on the maps. That ranges from mud to grass to forest, fields and roads. We also have different kinds of roads, asphalt, cobblestone and dirt road. And all of these will influence how fast you'll be driving, and each vehicle has some different settings to set how good it is on the various surfaces. What the terrain does is that it sets how fast the vehicle is going, and each vehicle is set up with an off-road speed and a top road speed, and the terrain's just set how much of amount between being on road and off-road it is.
Okay.
And then it also changes the friction and the bumpiness of the
like
vehicle.
the bumpiness you told me about that.
So when you're going out in rough terrain, you'll actually see the vehicle hop around. So I've now spawned a motorcycle because that's one of the more extreme cases. It is very fast on the road now. It's actually faster than it was before, but it is quite bad when you're going off-road. So let me just go out in the dirt here. You'll see I'm crawling to a very slow, almost a stop here. And that's because motorcycles are just not meant to drive off-road.
No, not these motorcycles at least.
Yeah, they will be able to drive through the stuff completely, but they'll be quite slow, especially when you're in the forest like this. And that's just to encourage the different classes of vehicles and give them benefits and pros and cons. So a motorcycle is the vehicle you choose when you're going to drive on the road.
What if I wanted to go through the swamp?
In the swamp, that's when this will be really, really terrible to drive on a motorcycle.
That's not a good idea now.
I am almost at a complete halt here, but I'm still going forward. It's just really, really, really slow. So if I want to take shortcuts through forest and swamps, I'm better off picking a different vehicle other than the motorcycle. And luckily enough, there is a better motorcycle for this. That is, of course, the Kettenkrad, which is the German tracked motorcycle. And let's just see how this passes through the swamp. And I just...
you hit a rock.
Yes.
But there's a lot more speed to it.
Yes. And also if I go through the forest...
it's faster there as well. We should mention that, of course, all these values, speed values, and how they react to terrain and stuff like that, nothing is set in final stone. It's something we're gonna look at.
And that's also where we have been getting a lot of positive feedback. And I mean positive not in that everyone says, "Oh, this is great." No. Positive is in they come with really constructive criticism. One of the more later changes I did to the handling was I added 10% speed to all off-road vehicles because people were complaining that it was a bit too slow when going off-road. So I added 10% in response to the community feedback. So again, thanks community, you are really helping this. And even when we release this update, please just continue giving us the feedback because we will be doing tweaks to this after the release.
Cool. Great. So to sum it up, we had a look at all vehicles being basically redone from the bottom up.
Yes.
All handling has been adjusted. Speeds has been adjusted to match real life values. We've added terrain.
Yeah. And I would also like to make a shout out to our reference forum who has been helping me a lot on this vehicle update by finding all the data, discussing all the data when there's conflicting data, and just doing my research work a lot easier.
That's cool.
Thanks community.
Much appreciated.